Welcome to Cepher Commentaries. Today we continue with Bere'shiyth, chapter 25. And again, Abraham took a woman, and her name was Keturah, and she bore him Zimran, and Yokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Yishbak, and Shuach. And Yokshan fathered Sheva and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, the Letushim, and the Leumim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Avidah, and Eldaah. These were the children of Keturah. And Abraham gave all that he had to Yitzchak. All right, now let's begin with our commentary at this point. First of all, we see that the Midianites appear to be of the children of Abraham through Keturah. We're not told exactly who Keturah was. Was she Hebrew? Was she Egyptian? We don't know. Was she actually the stranger, Hagar? We don't know that either. But we do know that these 6 sons were born to her. And from this son, Midian, we would see an additional 5 sons, creating tribes that are apparently relevant as to what we're going to see happen later in the book Shemot, where a Midianite becomes the father-in-law of Moshe. And in verse 5, and Abraham gave all that he had to Yitzchak. Now, this is a very interesting disposition because, again, the Torah of Moshe is going to spell out later on that the distribution of the estate of the patriarch is to be distributed equally among all of the children, with the double portion being given to the firstborn. But we're not going to see that actually happen in effect until we get to Yaakov. Abraham does just the opposite. He gives all of the estate to Yitzchak. However, he does give gifts. You would call these intravivos gifts that were given to the children of the concubines. And you might recall that here we see the word to the sons of the concubines, which Abraham had. That would be plural. Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Yitzchak, his son, while yet he lived eastward into the east country. Okay, quite interesting because, of course, this indicates that Keturah was not Gimer, or Hagar rather, the stranger, but rather was a different woman because there were 2 concubines, the mother of Ishmael and the mother of these 6 sons, all of whom received intervivos gifts, but not the estate. The estate went singularly to Yitzchak, who was not the firstborn of Abraham, but was the firstborn of the marriage of Abraham and Sarah. Interesting. All right, let's continue. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived, 175 years. Then Abraham gave up his breath and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons, Yitzchak and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zochar, the Hittite, which is before Mamre. The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Chet, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his woman. Now, again, here we have a very interesting situation because apparently this tomb, Marat Machpelah, was actually in the land of the Hittites, or you might even call them the Chethites, because they were the sons of Chet, the Chethites. And there's been a lot of speculation as to about the capital of the Hittite Empire, which is supposedly Hattusa, which was found outside the outskirts of Ankara in central Turkey. Well, that would put Marat Machpelah somewhere up in central Turkey and not somewhere else. Very interesting situation. How far did this Hittite Empire go? Now, there's reason to believe that there may have been 2 incarnations of the Hittites. That is to say, we have the earlier Hittites and then the latter Hittites. All of it, of course, is predicated upon the letter Chet. All right. At any rate, it does create a mystery as to where is Marat Machpelah. Today we have a discussion in modernity that Marat Machpelah is a tomb that exists in the city, identified as Hebron in the state of Palestine, or the nation state of Israel, depending on how you look at it. And actually, it's not the nation state of Israel, because technically it's in the West Bank, the Judean part of the West Bank, and this is Hebron, and also spelled in the text as Chevron. You might see it as Chevron, but it's pronounced Hebron. And there's this claim that this is the Marat Machpelah, the tomb of Abraham and Sarah, right there in the middle of Hebron. Is it? Is it even possible? Is there ever a claim anywhere in Scripture that the Hittites held the Holy Land? So we've got one of two conditions. Either one, that is the site of Abraham's condition, in which case that's not the Holy Land because it was the land of the Hittites, or that's not Abraham's tomb location because Abraham's tomb is located in the land of the Hittites. Okay, very interesting situation. And it happened after the death of Abraham that Elohim blessed his son, Yitzchak, and Yitzchak dwelt by the well, Be'er Lachai Roi. Lachai Roi. Now, we talked about this. This is the life of the shepherd. And again, these wells were named after oaths. They were named after oaths. You might recall that Abraham had a very difficult time digging out a well, because he would dig it out and then the Palestinians would come in and bury it. I can't imagine burying a freshwater well. You have to be nuts to do something like that. If you have fresh water, why wouldn't you allow the water to perk? But they did. And so Abraham would dig well after well after well until finally some of the wells were retained. And this was one of those wells. There's also the well of Yaakov that was up in Shiloh. And there's the well at Bere'shiyth, the place of 7 oaths, the well of 7 oaths. So, and when we see these wells, these were hand dug. So this wasn't, a lot of people think, oh yeah, you just dig this narrow little round thing down and then, then everything's good. It doesn't work that way. When you start digging down like that, you're going to find yourself buried alive if you're not very, very careful. And so typically they would dig much bigger holes than that, and they would dig down until they got to water. So quite a ways to dig. I mean, I know my well is 240 something feet deep, a long way to dig. Okay, now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar, the stranger from Mitzrayim, Sarah's handmaid, bore to Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. Now, here again, when we see this idea of the Toldat that is given to us here in this word generations, this is talking about a genetic seed line. A genetic seed line. You might call it a tribe, is another good word for it. But this is a genetic seed line. And remember that when people say, oh, Ishmael, he was kicked out and cursed. No, he was not. He was actually blessed, as were his 12 sons blessed. But remember, his mother was from Mitzrayim, and when she was expelled from Abraham, she undoubtedly returned to Mitzrayim. Yet in this narrative here, we see Yaakov Yitzchak and Ishmael coming together to bury Abraham. All right, these are the generations, and these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, that would be the primogenitor who would receive the double portion. This is Neviot. Now, Neviot, of course, that name has a meaning in Hebrew. It means the prophets, Neviot, and Kedar, and Ad Baal, that is to say, he who testifies, and Mivzam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Masa, and Hadar, and Tema, and Yetur, Naphish, and Kedema. Now, these are going to become tribal leaders. Have you ever heard of these tribes? Do you see any history concerning these tribes in the rest of Scripture? You don't, but they were undoubtedly tribes inside of Mitzrayim that prospered. So when you see that the house of Abraham and the house of Yaakov, 2 generations later, are going to come down to Mitzrayim in order to be fed, they're walking into a land that is in part populated by these 12 tribes. That's who they're dealing with, right? So they're dealing with cousins in Mitzrayim. So these are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and by their castles or fortresses, 12 princes according to their nations. Okay, very important. Again, when we talk about the generation, the generation, and the nation, these are all kind of very similar words. They're all talking about a genetic expansion of a singular tribe, a specific DNA pattern, if you will, that emerges from one of these 12 fathers to create their own separate ethnic identity. The word for nation is typically goy. Nations, goyim, goyim. This particular branch of goyim is going to be branded after one of these 12 patriarchs. And it says here, these are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns, by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations or tribes. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he gave up his breath and died and was gathered to his people. And they dwelt from Havilah to Shur. That is before Mitzrayim, as you go towards Asherah. And he died in the presence of all his brethren. Okay, so the land of Havilah is where one of the rivers in Genesis is talked about running. And the land of Havilah is where Ishmael would live. He would live in the land of Havilah, which is close to Shur, which is just alongside Mitzrayim as you go towards Asherah. Well, let's see. That would be very interesting. If you assume that Asherah is going to be the Assyrian Empire, that would be in northern Iraq in the modern understanding, Mitzrayim being Egypt in the modern understanding. Therefore, the land of Shur had to be somewhere what we would now call Palestine or Jordan, and the land of Havilah would be somewhere there. But that's interesting because there's no major river running through any of that area. So again, we have a geographic description that is, for lack of a better word, suspect. Okay, and these are the generations of Yitzhak, Abraham's son. Okay, now we're going to begin to enter into the explosive material, and it becomes extremely explosive in this chapter from here. Abraham fathered Yitzhak, and Yitzhak was 40 years old when he took Rivkah to be his woman, the daughter of Bethuel, the Arami of Padan Aram. And you might recall that this is understood in the modern world as basically Syria. The sister to Lavan, the Arami. And you might recall that Lavan was the one that Yitzhak was presented to be approved. And Yitzhak entreated Yahweh for his woman because she was barren. Once again, as Sarai was barren for many, many years, now we see Yitzhak has married Rivkah and she is barren. And Yahweh was sought by him, and Rivkah, his woman, conceived. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it is so, why am I like this? And she went to inquire of Yahweh, and Yahweh said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 nations are in your womb. Well, now that is a very interesting statement because, of course, when you say 2 nations are in your womb, as we have seen in talking about this so far, that when we talk about a nation or a generation, you're talking about a particular genetic disposition. A genetic disposition. And this genetic disposition, to say that 2 nations are in her womb, is to say that there are two different genes, 2 different genetics, right? All right, now let's see. So yeah, and again, the passage here, the way it reads in Genesis 25:23 in the Ivrit is it's going to specify here, Lamer Yahweh le sheni goyim. Le sheni goyim. 2 nations, goyim. 2 nations are in your womb. And so when we see this idea of 2 nations, we're talking about 2 genetic dispositions, 2 different genetic dispositions. And And it said, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 manners of people shall be separated from your generation. 2 manners of people. So they're distinctly different. Now, when you look at this idea of twins, you have most people assume that there are 2 kinds of twins, right? You have what's called identical twins, which are really quite a miracle when you see them. And I think they're a thing of beauty, really, in Yah's world. And then you have fraternal twins, which are, twins born on the same day, occupying the same womb at the same time during the same 9 months of pregnancy, but they're born and they're 2 completely different people. They're fraternal twins. Sometimes they can be male and female, even. And then you have this thing called superinfecundation, which is where you have 2 children by 2 different fathers that are in the womb at the same time and born as twins. Now, is this the case here? Yes, you're going to see that the scripture is going to refer to them as 2 nations initially, but secondarily as twins. So it's not like, gee, there's two nations in your womb. One was born here, and then another was born in the same year. No, that's not the case. Yahweh said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 manners of people shall be separated from your generation. The one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Well, once again, you have this idea of the primogenitor not being the Yachid. The firstborn Adam, not the Yachid. The firstborn Cain, not the Yachid. The firstborn Yishmael, not the Yachid. The firstborn to Yitzhak, Esau, not the Yachid. The firstborn to Yaakov, Reuben, not the Yachid. The firstborn to Judah, Zerach, not the Yachid. So it's a very interesting anomaly in Scripture that we see this over and over again, that it is the secondborn that, for instance, how about Ephraim and Manasseh? When Ephraim and Manasseh are presented to Yaakov, he places, Joseph puts Manasseh on his right leg and he puts Ephraim on his left leg, and he says, bless them. And Yaakov crosses his hands, and Joseph says, don't do that. Manasseh's the firstborn here on your right, and Ephraim's the secondborn. He crosses his hand nonetheless, and he says, the elder will serve the younger. The second will be a great company of nations. The elder will be a great nation, but the younger will be a great company of nations, and the elder shall serve the younger. He didn't say that exactly, but that's what happens. All right. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, this is verse 24, behold, there were twins in her womb. So now we're going to see that this is described as the birth of twins, even though the descriptive before is 2 nations. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. Now, a lot of people say, oh, it's Esau. Well, it really is not Esau. It's Esau. And this is Ayin Sin Vav. Not Sheen, but Ayin Sin Vav. It's a conspicuous inversion of the last 3 letters of Yahusha. Yahusha, Yod He, Vav Shin Ayin. If you flip that, you not only have to flip it to Ayin Shin Vav, but it has to be Ayin Sin Vav, because the dot signifying it as Shin or Sin also flips. So it is no longer Usha, but rather Esau. Okay, and after that, his brother came out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Yaakov. And Yitzhak was 80 years old when she bore them. Okay, so Yitzhak is 60. They've been married for 20 years, and this is when she bores them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Yaakov was an upright man, dwelling in tents. Okay, so we're no longer talking about boys here, okay? They're men now. And Yitzhak loved Esau because he did eat of his venison. Yitzhak liked the idea of the macho Esau. This kid's pretty tough. He's a great hunter. He's a great fisher. He brings home great meat. Yeah, this guy and I, we get along. But Rivka loved Yaakov. And Yaakov sowed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to El Yaakov, feed me, I pray, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore, his name was called Edom. Now, this is something that is critical for the listener to understand in terms of how this kind of plays out. Because remember, we have this difficulty, and this is the best illustration of this difficulty. We have a difficulty in Hebrew, which is that the language has died some 7 times. And when it was rebirthed by the Masoretes in the 7th or 8th century AD. And these Masoretes, when they rebirthed the language, they did so by giving a pronunciation guide called the Nikudot, or the cookie crumbs. Now, these cookie crumbs include lines and dots that are sometimes featured under the letters, most of the time under the letters, but sometimes, halfway up in the letters, and sometimes even above the letters. And so these dots and lines are going to be illustrative of how you pronounce the word. Okay, so we've got this very interesting word. And the interesting word is Adam. So Adam in the Hebrew is Aleph, Dalet, Mem Sophit. Now the Sophit means the final letter, final mem, final mem. Aleph, Dalet, Mem Sophit. Well, when you're dealing with the color red, red is the word Adom. But how is it spelled? Aleph, Dalet, Mem Sophit. And Edom is this language of G. He was called Edom. How is that spelled? Aleph, Dalet, Mem Sophit. So you have 3 words that are spelled exactly the same. The only difference is the Masoretes are going to distinguish for you how these are to be pronounced. Now, if you were to ignore this outright, suppose you said that Edom, no, it's Aleph, Dalet, Mem. It's just Adam. For I am faint, therefore his name was called Adam, not Edom, right? Adam, but not Edom. Well, or also possible to say his name was called Adom. Why Adom? Because Adom means red, right? So Yaakov sowed the pottage, Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And he comes in, like a lot of young people do. Hey, I'm starving. You're not starving. You had breakfast this morning. Well, it's been 4 hours. I feel a little bit hungry. I'm starving. What do you got to eat? That kind of an attitude. Now, the book of Jasher, of course, tells us a lot more about this particular event and why Esau was so hungry. He wasn't just a little bit hungry. He was very, very hungry. But nonetheless, he comes in and he says, feed me, I pray, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Well, what do you think that red pottage was? Well, obviously it was borscht. Put in some beets there, maybe a few onions, and away you go, borscht. And so anyway, he took of the red pottage, being a red-haired guy covered with red hair, and then he was called Edom. Why? Because he was eating red pottage, red-haired man eating red pottage. His name was called Edom. And Yaakov said, sell me this day your birthright. And Esau said, behold, I'm at the point to die. What profit shall this birthright do for me? And Yaakov said, well, swear 7 oaths to me this day. And he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Yaakov. Then Yaakov gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and he rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now, the important point of this is not that Yaakov bought his birthright, but that in Yah's eyes, Esau despised his birthright. What do I care about the birthright? I'm hungry. He sold his birthright for bread and soup. Now, we see this quite often. You can see this, traditionally, for instance, in the music industry or in the acting industry, where these people, these starving artists, they want to succeed in the industry, and they're willing to sell their soul to obtain whatever. Now, I've seen some of these people who'd be willing to sell their soul for a McDonald's hamburger. I mean, I'm not kidding you. Some people are so low priced, they'll sell their soul for anything, and having no recognition that you only get to do it once, right? I'd sell my soul for that. Too late. You already sold it. What? Yeah, you sold it for a McDonald's hamburger. Oh, wait a minute. I want to get that back, and so I can sell it to you so I can get a film contract. Nope, too late. Your soul's already gone. You already sold it. But the idea of selling your soul is not that you've sold your soul to Satan, but that you have despised the value of your soul. You've despised the value of your soul. And as a result, you're going that Yahweh is going to take this very seriously. Now, I want to make it clear here at this point, we're not talking about boys that are doing this, okay? These guys are now men. They're well into adulthood. They're not boys. These guys are men. And you're going to see that when we get into the blessing that's about to take place, when we get into the blessing, that you're going to find also that when you're talking about Yitzchak being on his deathbed, how old do you think Yaakov and Esau were? I mean, if Yitzchak is 120, or I don't know how old he is when he died, but if he's that age, those boys were 60. They were 60 years old when it came to the blessing. And so to think that Yaakov did not know what he was doing is, no, it's not good. Okay. Now, there's something else I wanted to make up here and talk about this. The idea that there is this relationship that takes place between Yitzchak and Abimelech. And so this kind of a situation that took place between Yitzchak and Abimelech, where Yitzchak goes to Abimelech and represents to Abimelech, oh yeah, this is my sister. This is my sister, Rivka. She wasn't his sister. Now, Abraham did the same thing when he represented Sarai as his sister, but she was his half-sister. But Yitzchak tells Abimelech, yes, she's my sister. Well, she wasn't his sister. And furthermore, he wasn't in Mitzrayim. And furthermore, there is no dream given to Abimelech concerning the relationship between Rivka and Yitzchak. So we don't know how long this goes on. But at some point, Abimelech sees Yitzchak with Rivka out in the garden, and they're clearly husband and wife. And so he goes to Yitzchak and says, hey, what's this? You guys, this isn't your sister. This is obviously your wife. So what is this phony baloney? You need to pack your stuff and hit the road, move out. We don't know how long it was that they were there. And we do not know whether or not it's possible that Abimelech actually was the one who fathered Esau. In other words, there was a joint conception that took place. Abimelech, the father of Esau, and Yitzchak, the father of Yaakov. It's possible. Scientifically, this is possible. It can happen, and it does happen. And if that's the case, that would be some way that you might be able to understand this phrase where it says, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 nations are in your womb. And it also explains a great deal about what is going to later happen. And remember that this is not as wild and as crazy as a lot of people get offended and go, oh, well, that's not possible. You're calling Rivka, a harlot. First of all, take off the blinders, right? This is the Old Testament. As I mentioned to you yesterday when we were talking about chapter 24, there's no marriage ceremony between Yitzchak and Rivka. There is a courting ceremony that's quite elaborate and consent and all the rest of this stuff. And then basically, yeah, she's my wife. There isn't any huppah or giving vows or, toasting or having bridegrooms. None of that stuff existed. So to think that these kinds of things didn't happen would be ludicrous, especially when you read in the gospel that says a man came in to sow a field and he planted wheat. And while he was away, another one came in and planted tares. And the tares grew up alongside the wheat. You see, that's a very interesting parable that's given to us in the Gospels that may be describing this pregnancy of Rivka where 2 nations are in her womb, because the wheat was planted, but somebody came in unawares and planted the tares at the same time. Very important part to understand in this chapter 25, because it explains a lot of the history that's going to follow. Okay, that concludes our reading of Bere'shiyth, Genesis, chapter 25.